through school thinking they're not smart at all.
Right. I mean, that's, I think, important for parents to hear, especially if they want to understand their children and open up their child's mind to the possibilities that this isn't the only way to rate yourself, or it's not the only way to make it in the world. Oh, can you tell the story about Jillian?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that meetings gave rise to the book is a wonderful woman I met called Gillian Lynn. I don't know if has anybody heard of Gillian Lynn? Most people haven't, but everybody knows the work she does. She was a choreographer and was responsible for Cats and Phantom of the Opera, which you do know about. Anyway, Gillian, I used to be on the board of the Royal Ballet in England, as you can see, and really, and
luckily you changed from those tights into this suit, because that had to convince you.
Actually, I have the tights on beneath, but it's a comfort thing. It's a comfort thing.
Sure.
But sequins are hard to sit on, don't you find, really?
Well, when you got them on inside out.
For any length of time. For any length of time. But,
so Jillian became a dancer.
Well, what happened was I had lunch with her one day and I said, how did you get to be a dancer? And she said that when she was at school in England in the 30s, she was a bad student. She was always fidgeting at the elementary school, staring out the window, didn't hand the homework in on time, always distracted. I think now, let's say she had ADHD. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying there's no such thing, but I think it's being wildly overdiagnosed, don't you?
And medicated.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's medicating the personality out of some
I know kids who got wonderfully all kids have wonderfully lively imaginations, they've got great energy, and they're being sedated to keep them with the program. And some of the most brilliant people I know you would never have heard of them if this stuff had been available years ago. I'm not saying there's no place for it, I'm not saying there's not a real condition, but it's not as widespread as it's being said to be, I'm sure. But anyway, Gillian was... the school thought she had a special educational problem, and they thought she should maybe go to a special school. So she was sent for an assessment. She was about 9 or 10, and she said, I remember going into this room with my mother to see this psychologist. And, it was like an open-panelled room with leather-bound books. Not as groovy as this, but,
I'm groovy.
But you are groovy, and he wasn't. And but she sat for 20 minutes while this guy spoke to her mother about all the problems Gillian was having at school and all the problems she was causing. And she said all the time she was sitting on her hands, frightened to fidget. And he said at the end of this 20 minutes, this man stood up and went and sat next to her. And he said, Gillian, you've been really patient, but I need to speak to your mother privately now, but you need to be patient a few minutes longer. And with that, he said, we're going to leave the room, but we'll be back in a couple of minutes. And they got up and left. But as they were leaving the room, she said, he leant across his desk and turned the radio off. And they got into the corridor, and he turned to her mother and said, look, just stand here and watch her. Watch what... And of course, they moved out of the room, said, I was on my feet, moving to the music, all around the room.
Right, this is what she tells you, she couldn't help herself.
And he said, apparently they watched this for a few minutes, and then he turned to her mother, and he said, Mrs. Lynn, Gillian isn't sick, she's a dancer. Take her to a dance school. I said, what happened, Jim? He said, she did. And I walked into this room, and I can't explain the feeling. He said it was full of people like me. People who couldn't sit still. People who had to move to think. Well, she went on to the Royal Ballet School. She joined the Royal Ballet. She became a soloist. She formed her own company. And then later on in her career, she met Andrew Lloyd Webber, and they, between them, are responsible for some of the most successful musical theatre productions in history. She's given pleasure to millions, and she's probably a multi-millionaire. But somebody else might have put her on medication and told her to calm down.
It's a great... We're going to have more with Ken when we come back. Thank you for sharing that story. It meant a lot to me. We'll direct that. I'm a huge fan of the work that he continues to do. He's a PhD and wrote this book, The Element. And, of course, I was lucky enough to be sent one of his lectures, and it inspired and taught me so much about myself as well. And one of the other things you talk about that I find fascinating is that kids say are afraid to be wrong. And how else do we learn?
Well, exactly. And see, part of the problem in schools is this culture of standardized testing. And, I mean, I don't know, let me ask you a question, people in the audience here. How many of you have got 2 children? How many of you have seen 2 children? How about that? Well, I'm one of 7, and Bonnie's one of 7. And I don't need to know your kids to know this is true. That they are, if you've got 2 kids, they're completely different from each other, aren't they? Completely different. I've got 6 siblings, and we're all different. We love each other, but we're all different, and I'm sure that's true of your family. And the problem is, and it's not the fault of teachers, but because of the current system, we're judging all kids as if they were the same, and they're all different. We're not looking into people's eyes and seeing who they really are. And it's compounded by this multi-billion-dollar industry in standardized testing. Now, I mean, don't get me wrong, I think standardized tests have a place.
Sure.
You know, I mean,
but they shouldn't define children.
No, you know, if I have a blood test, I want a standardized test. You know, I want to know what my cholesterol is,
right.
Compared to yours. I don't want my doctor to say it's what I call level orange. You know what I mean? Like, I want a standardized test. But it's what you do with the information. And this, I think, that's really the heart of the problem, that all kids are different, they have very different talents, they learn differently, they think differently, and great teachers always knew that. But the system that we have now was designed really to meet the needs of manufacturing. And it's like a manufacturing system. You know, it's about conformity. And the result of that, by the way, in America, is that 30% of kids drop out before they finish high school, and 50% in some communities. And by the way, I live in America, you know, so I hope you don't feel I've just come over and take a few shots at this. You know,
no.
I do live here, and we're very invested in this. But when you've got a 30% dropout rate, maybe 50%, you can't blame kids at that point. There's something wrong with the system, and it's the system that needs to be fixed. And I think it's inhibiting teachers as much as the kids themselves.
Where does this path lead us? Yes, exactly. You know, I just feel for them. That they feel like somehow they're failing, and then they do give up. I think they do just say, forget it, it's easier to walk away than to be there and be wrong and struggle a little bit, knowing that it's not the only way I define myself. But where does this lead? What happens? How do we improve our school systems?
Well, I think part of it is that we have to think differently about ability. We have a very limited view these days of intelligence. We think it's all about IQ. You know, but really intelligence is wonderfully different and diverse. You know, if you look at the creative things that people do in dance, in music, in television, in radio, in sport, intelligence is fantastically diverse. But in schools, we're forced to focus on a particular type of intelligence. So that's really what the book is about. I mean, the first bit, you know, when we say people are in their element, it really means they're enjoying themselves, they're really being themselves, doesn't it? And I think that's 2 things. One is that you're doing something that you're naturally good at. And we're all very good at different things. For some people, that's math. For some people, it's not. You know, they go through the whole of their school being judged against math, and math
is a huge part of the.
And they don't get it. Yeah. For some people, it's gymnastics. You know, one of the people I interviewed for the book is a great guy called Bart Connor. You know, who's a gymnast. Do you know him?
Yeah.
Bart found, he's a wonderful guy. He found when he was 6 that he could walk on his hands as easily as he could walk on his feet. But the thing is, his mother had the sense to see a message there. And lots of people, kids give you messages. You know, some kids are drawn to drawing. Some are making music all the time. You know, some like Gillian have to move. Some are doing math. You have to hear the message and then encourage it. And the other thing is, life isn't linear. You know, nobody could have predicted what Bart would have gone on to do. But when you find your talent, your whole life changes. You have a different life. It's like in your life. Your life has changed because you've invested in the thing that you love to do. You lead a different life because of that. And your life takes on a different meaning. And I think if education is not about helping people to find a life with purpose and meaning and fulfillment, then what is it about? You know, and you do that by rethinking talent. That's the first step. And then you build a different type of system around that.
With you.
Oh, thank you.
You guys, we're going to bring Ken back. And just even on your own, if you could do a whole hour with us, I would really appreciate it, because I just think there's so much more to cover. And if you want more on Ken right now, you can go to bonniehunt.com and we'll lead you to it. Thanks so much for being here.
That's great.